What goes into the data gathering, and I know that because in recent times there've been concerns about how relevant this data is, and I know that there's even talk about also rebasing and all the rest. What goes into this data if you do a summary and a breakdown for us, and how relevant is this data? Because I've heard you talked about rebasing the year for calculating all these things, and why are those things happening as well? Yeah.
So again, let me step back to your earlier question in terms of the relevance of it and the agenda that we are pursuing at Ghana Statistical Service now. We want to move the narrative away from the national figures and really talk about the disaggregates, because that is where we think would be more informative for policymakers to deal with it. So anytime we release inflation on a monthly basis, we do disaggregations at various levels. The first level is to talk about the food and non-food inflation. We talk about inflation from the perspective of imported items and domestically produced items. Go further down to break down the items that we have into 13 divisions and give inflation figures for all the 13 divisions. The most important thing that we do is that we look at the contribution of each of the 13 divisions to the overall inflation. So you can have an inflation figure of 50.3, as we had for November 2022, at the 13 divisions level, where we have divisions such as transport, housing, water, electricity and gas, food and non-alcoholic beverages, education, financial services, and health. These are some of the 13 divisions that we have. We give the inflation rate for all these 13 divisions. So for instance, in November, housing, water, electricity and gas recorded the highest rate of inflation across the 13 divisions, with an inflation figure of about 79%. What we are emphasizing is to what extent did it contribute to the 50.3? That is where the issue of weights are important, because if you look at the weights across the 13 divisions, food and non-alcoholic beverages alone account for 43.7%, whereas housing, water, electricity and gas account for about 10.8% as weights. So if you factor in the issue of weight, you realize that the contribution of food and non-alcoholic beverages to the 50.3% interest rate that we recorded is higher, although its inflation rate, the inflation rate for food and non-alcoholic beverages was 55%, relative to 79% for housing, water, electricity, and gas. So we are encouraging policymakers to focus more on the disaggregations. We do the same for the regional disaggregation. Anytime we do inflation, we say inflation for all our 16 administrative regions. Now everybody is talking about Eastern region having the highest inflation. Yeah. Yes, it is. But if you look at the contribution of Greater Accra and Ashanti region, they have relatively higher weights. Greater Accra, for instance, has a weight of about 28%. So close to about a third of the overall inflation. So although it didn't record the highest rate of inflation, its contribution to overall inflation was about 47.9%. And Eastern region that had the highest rate of inflation of about 63%, it had a contribution of just about 11% to the overall inflation. So the details is in the disaggregates, and that is where we want policymakers to focus on.